The scorching sun hung like a fiery omen in the cloudless Arizona sky as Benjamin Hayes squinted at the figure sprawled beside the abandoned well. At first, he thought it might be another mirage. The desert had a way of playing cruel tricks on a man's mind, but the shallow rise and fall of her chest told him this was no illusion. A woman, half dead from the heat, her once fine dress now tattered and dust-covered, lay motionless on the cracked earth of the Sonoran Desert. It was 1874, and finding anyone alive out here, let alone a woman alone, was about as rare as rainfall in July. Benjamin dismounted his horse with practiced ease, his spurs jangling against the hardened ground as he approached her cautiously. His weathered hand instinctively moved to rest on his Colt revolver. Caution was a habit that had kept him breathing for 29 years in this unforgiving territory. "Madam," he called, his voice rough from too much trail dust and not enough water. "Madam, can you hear me?" The woman stirred slightly, her cracked lips parting as she tried to form words. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of spring cornflowers, stark against her sun-reddened face. Benjamin knelt beside her, removing his canteen from his saddle. As he uncorked it, the woman's gaze fixed desperately on the container, her parched throat working as she tried to speak. "Water," she finally managed, the word barely audible. Benjamin looked down at her, then at his canteen. There wasn't much left, perhaps half a day's worth if he rationed it carefully. His own throat burned with thirst. He'd been riding since dawn with only 2 small sips to sustain him. But something about the woman's determined gaze, even in her weakened state, stirred something inside him. "You'll drink before I do," he said firmly, lifting her head gently with one hand while bringing the canteen to her lips with the other. She drank greedily at first before Benjamin pulled the canteen away. "Easy now, too much too fast will make you sick." Her eyes held his for a moment, gratitude and something else, perhaps suspicion, evident in their blue depths. "Thank you," she whispered. "Benjamin Hayes," he offered, settling her head back against his rolled-up jacket. "And who might you be, if you don't mind my asking?" "Beatrice," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Beatrice Thornton." Benjamin nodded, his gaze traveling over her form, assessing for injuries. "Miss Thornton, what in heaven's name are you doing out here all alone?" A shadow crossed her face and she turned away slightly. "It's complicated. Most things worth explaining are," he replied, allowing her another small sip of water. "But that can wait. First, we need to get you somewhere safe. Tucson's about a day's ride from here." "No," the force of her objection surprised them both. She softened her tone. "No, please, not Tucson." Benjamin's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd encountered enough fugitives to recognize fear when he saw it. "All right then. There's a small settlement about 4 hours east. Man named Jackson runs a trading post there. We can get you fixed up, figure out what's next." Relief visibly washed over Beatrice's features. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." "Benjamin," he corrected, helping her to a sitting position. "Or Ben, if you prefer. We're going to be sharing a horse for the next several hours. Might as well be on familiar terms." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Beatrice's lips. Benjamin, then, getting Beatrice onto his horse Duster, proved challenging. She was weakened from exposure and dehydration, but Benjamin noted her determined effort not to show pain. He settled her in the saddle before mounting behind her, one arm securely around her waist to keep her steady. "I apologize for the impropriety," he said as they set off, the desert stretching endlessly around them. "I believe impropriety is the least of my concerns at present," she replied, her voice slightly stronger after the water, "though I appreciate the sentiment." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of Duster's hooves against the hard ground the only sound breaking the vast quiet. Benjamin was acutely aware of Beatrice's body against his, the subtle lavender scent that somehow persisted despite her ordeal. It had been a long time since he'd been this close to a woman, especially one as fine-featured as Beatrice appeared to be beneath the dirt and sunburn. "May I ask how you ended up beside that well?" he finally asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Beatrice remained silent for so long that Benjamin thought she might have fallen asleep. When she spoke, her voice was measured as though carefully selecting each word. I was traveling with a companion. We were ambushed by bandits 2 days ago. They took everything, our horses, our supplies. My companion fought back and was shot. Her voice caught slightly. I ran, wandered until I couldn't anymore. Benjamin nodded, though she couldn't see him. I'm sorry about your companion. He was not a good man, she said quietly, but he didn't deserve to die like that. The statement hung in the air between them, raising more questions than it answered. Benjamin had learned long ago not to pry too deeply into strangers' pasts. The West was full of people running from something, himself included. There's been a band of outlaws working this territory, he offered instead. Led by a man called Reese Turner, sheriff in Tucson's had a wanted poster up for months. Beatrice stiffened slightly at the name. Yes, she said after a moment. I believe that was the name I heard. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Benjamin pulled Duster into the meager shade of a rock formation, helping Beatrice down before dismounting himself. Her legs buckled when they hit the ground, and he caught her strong arms, keeping her upright. I'm fine, she insisted, though her pale face suggested otherwise. Stubborn woman, Benjamin muttered, lowering her gently to sit against the rocks. Rest a spell. We've made good time. He offered her another sip from the canteen, which she accepted gratefully. He noticed she'd taken only enough to wet her mouth, conscious of their limited supply. You haven't had any, she observed, offering the canteen back to him. Benjamin shook his head. I said you'd drink before I did, I meant it. That's admirable but foolish, Beatrice said, her blue eyes studying his face. We both need water to survive. I've gone longer without, he said simply. Desert teaches a man his limits. Benjamin busied himself checking on Duster, giving the horse the last handful of grain from his saddlebag. He was aware of Beatrice watching him, her gaze thoughtful. You've been out here a long time, she stated rather than asked. Benjamin nodded. Since '62, came west after the war, you fought for the Union? Yes, madam, and now he turned to face her. Now I hunt bounties when I need money, guide travelers when they need direction, and mind my own business the rest of the time. A solitary existence, she observed, simpler that way. He checked the position of the sun. We should move on if we want to reach Jackson's by nightfall. The next few hours passed in companionable silence, broken occasionally by Benjamin pointing out landmarks or warning Beatrice of approaching rough terrain. He could feel her growing weaker against him, her body occasionally sagging before she would straighten herself with visible effort. Tell me about yourself, Benjamin, she said suddenly, her voice faint. Keep me awake. Understanding her request, Benjamin began to speak, his deep voice rumbling against her back. Not much to tell, grew up in Pennsylvania, father was a blacksmith. Joined up with the Union Army when I was 17, saw things no man should see. He paused. After Appomattox, couldn't stand the idea of going back to that small town. Everything seemed smaller somehow, headed west instead. You have family, parents passed on. Sister married a banker in Chicago, write to her twice a year. He adjusted his grip around Beatrice's waist as she swayed slightly. What about you? Where's home? Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Boston, originally, but I haven't considered it home for some time. And where were you headed before the bandits? California, she replied. San Francisco, I have a cousin there. Benjamin nodded, though something in her tone made him wonder if there was more to her story. Everyone had secrets out here, it was the nature of the frontier. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, a small collection of buildings appeared in the distance. That's Jackson's trading post, Benjamin said. Not much to look at, but the beds are clean and the food's decent. Beatrice's relief was palpable. I never thought I'd be so happy to see civilization. Calling Jackson civilization might be stretching it, Benjamin chuckled, but it's safe enough. The trading post consisted of a main building that served as store and saloon, a small stable, and several crude cabins for travelers. As they approached, a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard emerged from the main building, wiping his hands on a stained apron. Hayes, he called, recognition lighting his weathered face. Been a while. Jackson, Benjamin greeted, dismounting before carefully helping Beatrice down. She sagged against him, her strength finally giving out. Need a room and some food. Lady's been lost in the desert. Jackson's eyebrows rose as he took in Beatrice's condition, but he asked no questions. Sarah, he called back toward the building. A plump, motherly woman appeared in the doorway. Got a guest needs tending. Sarah bustled forward, her practiced eye assessing Beatrice's condition quickly. You poor dear, come along now. Benjamin reluctantly relinquished Beatrice to Sarah's capable hands, watching as the older woman led her toward one of the cabins. Beatrice glanced back once, her blue eyes meeting his. Thank you, she mouthed before disappearing inside. Jackson clapped Benjamin on the shoulder. Found yourself a fine-looking woman in the desert, eh? Must be my lucky day when Ben Hayes brings business my way. She needs help, that's all, Benjamin replied, leading Duster toward the stable. Bandits got her, Turner's gang most likely. Jackson's expression darkened. They hit the Marshall place last week, took everything worth taking. Marshall Downing rode out with a posse, but they lost the trail at Devil's Canyon. Benjamin nodded grimly. They're getting bolder. Rumor is they've got a man inside the law, Jackson said, lowering his voice. Someone feeding them information on shipments, travelers with valuables. That's how they pick their targets so well. Benjamin considered this as he unsaddled Duster, his thoughts turning to Beatrice and her mysterious circumstances. The lady have anything valuable on her when those bandits hit, Jackson shrugged. Didn't see nothing but a half-dead woman in a dirty dress, but Sarah'll find out whatever there is to know. Woman's got a gift for getting folks to talk. After seeing to his horse, Benjamin made his way to the rough-hewn bar inside the main building. A shot of whiskey burned pleasantly down his throat, easing the dryness from the day's journey. Several other travelers occupied the space, a pair of cattle drivers playing cards in the corner, a nervous-looking man in a city suit nursing a beer, and an old prospector dozing by the pot-bellied stove. Benjamin was on his second whiskey when Sarah appeared, her face flushed from exertion. That poor girl, she said, settling herself heavily on a stool beside him. Dehydrated something fierce, blisters on her feet and sunburn that'll peel for weeks, but she'll live thanks to you. She say anything about how she ended up out there? Sarah's eyes narrowed shrewdly. She told me enough, running from a bad situation that one, wouldn't give details, but I've seen that look before. She leaned closer. She's educated, Ben. Way she speaks, the little mannerisms, she's quality folk, not the usual type we get passing through. Benjamin nodded slowly, turning his glass between his fingers. She mentioned heading to San Francisco, to family. Did she now? Sarah looked skeptical. Well, she's in no condition to travel anywhere for at least a few days. I fixed her up in cabin 3, gave her some of my old clothes. That dress was beyond saving. I'll pay for her board, Benjamin said, reaching for his meager coin purse. Sarah waved him off. First night's on the house. You brought her in alive, that's payment enough. She studied his face for a moment. You staying too? Benjamin hadn't decided until that moment. He'd planned to resupply and head north toward Prescott, where rumor had it a bank robber with a $500 bounty on his head was hiding out. But something about leaving Beatrice here didn't sit right with him. One night, he said finally, got business in Prescott. Sarah gave him a knowing smile. Cabin 2's empty, I'll have Jackson bring you some supper. After a simple but filling meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread, Benjamin found himself standing outside cabin 3, uncertain of his purpose there. Before he could decide whether to knock or walk away, the door opened, revealing Beatrice. The transformation was remarkable. Clean-faced and wearing a simple calico dress that was slightly too large for her slender frame, she looked younger, softer somehow. Her auburn hair, free of dust and tied back with a ribbon, caught the last rays of the setting sun. Benjamin, she said, surprise evident in her voice. I was just coming to find you. Wanted to check how you were faring, he said, suddenly aware of his own disheveled appearance. Much better, thanks to you and Mrs. Jackson. She stepped back, gesturing for him to enter. Please come in. The cabin was small but tidy, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair beside a tiny window. Beatrice perched on the edge of the bed, leaving the chair for Benjamin. Sarah, Mrs. Jackson says I need to rest for a few days before continuing my journey, she said, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She also mentioned you're leaving tomorrow. Benjamin nodded, his hat in his hands. Got business up north. Of course. Beatrice's expression was carefully neutral. I wanted to thank you properly. Most men would have left me to die by that well. Most men, maybe, not any worth knowing. A small smile touched her lips. Still, I'm grateful, and I insist on repaying you somehow. Benjamin shook his head. No need for that. Perhaps not, but I'd like to. She hesitated. Mrs. Jackson says there's a bank in Tucson. Once I'm recovered enough to travel there, I can access funds to repay you for your kindness. The mention of Tucson reminded Benjamin of her earlier reaction. Thought you didn't want to go to Tucson. A shadow crossed Beatrice's face. I would prefer not to, but it seems I have limited options. Benjamin studied her for a long moment. Miss Thornton, I don't mean to pry, but if you're in some kind of trouble, I'm not a criminal if that's what you're asking, she interrupted, a flash of defiance in her blue eyes. I've broken no laws. Didn't say you had. He leaned forward slightly, but you're running from something or someone. Beatrice held his gaze for a beat before looking away. It's complicated, so you said. Benjamin stood, placing his hat back on his head. Well, whatever it is, you're safe here for now. Jackson keeps a shotgun behind the bar, and most folk know better than to cause trouble around him. Thank you, Beatrice said softly, for everything. Benjamin tipped his hat slightly. Get some rest, Miss Thornton. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him at the door. Benjamin, I meant what I said. I will repay you. He looked back at her, taking in her determined expression, the quiet dignity that seemed to surround her despite everything. I believe you will, he said, and closed the door gently behind him. That night, as Benjamin lay on the narrow bed in cabin 2, sleep eluded him. His thoughts kept returning to Beatrice, the mystery surrounding her, the fear that had flashed in her eyes at the mention of Tucson, the way she'd looked at him with such genuine gratitude. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him that way. Dawn was breaking when Benjamin made his decision. He packed his few belongings, settled his bill with Jackson, and headed toward cabin 3. Beatrice answered his knock almost immediately, already dressed despite the early hour. You're leaving, she said, noting his travel-ready appearance. Heading north, he confirmed. Thought I'd check on you before I went. Beatrice nodded, disappointment briefly visible in her eyes before she masked it with a polite smile. Safe travels, then. Benjamin cleared his throat. Actually, I was thinking, Prescott's a decent-sized town. Has a bank, reputable doctor, might be a good place for you to rest up properly before deciding your next move. Hope flickered across her face. Are you suggesting? I've got business there anyway, Benjamin said casually. Wouldn't be any trouble to have company on the trail. Beatrice's smile was genuine this time. I wouldn't want to delay your journey. Mrs. Jackson says I should rest for at least another day. I can wait a day. The words surprised him almost as much as they seemed to surprise her. Benjamin Hayes wasn't known for altering his plans for anyone. That is, if you'd prefer not to travel alone. I would very much prefer not to travel alone, Beatrice admitted, but I don't want to be a burden. You won't be. Benjamin shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the unexpected turn of events but somehow certain of his decision. We'll leave tomorrow if you're feeling strong enough. 3 days ride to Prescott if we take it slow. Relief and something else perhaps hope brightened Beatrice's expression. Thank you, Benjamin. I accept your offer. As Benjamin left to make arrangements with Jackson for supplies, he tried to ignore the voice in his head questioning his judgment. He'd survived this long by avoiding complications, and Beatrice Thornton was definitely a complication. Yet somehow, the thought of leaving her behind felt worse than the risk of bringing her along. 2 days later, they were on the trail to Prescott. Benjamin had acquired a gentle mare named Daisy from Jackson for Beatrice to ride. Despite Sarah Jackson's concerns, Beatrice had insisted she was strong enough for the journey. Her determination impressed Benjamin, though he kept a watchful eye on her as they traveled, noting the occasional wince when she thought he wasn't looking. The terrain gradually changed as they headed north, the harsh desert giving way to rolling grasslands dotted with juniper and pine. They made camp, each night in sheltered locations Benjamin knew from his travels. Despite his initial concerns, Beatrice proved to be a capable traveler, never complaining and always insisting on doing her share of the camp chores. On their second night on the trail, as they sat beside a small fire eating a simple supper of trail biscuits and rabbit Benjamin had shot earlier, Beatrice broke the comfortable silence between them. "You said you hunt bounties," she began, her voice thoughtful. "Does that mean you're searching for someone now?" In Prescott, Benjamin nodded, chewing thoughtfully before answering. "Man named Ellis Harrington robbed a bank in Phoenix last month. Word is he's holed up with relatives near Prescott. Is he dangerous?" "Most men are when they're cornered," Benjamin replied, "but he's not known to be particularly violent, more of an opportunist than a hardened criminal." Beatrice's expression grew troubled. "And you'll capture him, bring him to justice. That's the general idea." Benjamin studied her face in the flickering firelight. "Does that bother you?" She hesitated. "No, not exactly. Justice should be served. She trailed off, her gaze fixed on the flames. "Just what?" "I wonder about the circumstances that lead people to make such choices," she finally said. "What desperation or misfortune might have driven him to robbery?" Benjamin considered her words. It wasn't a perspective he often entertained in his line of work. Sometimes folks just make bad choices. "Simple as that?" "Perhaps," Beatrice conceded, "though I've found few things in life are truly simple." There was a weight to her words that suggested she was speaking from experience. Benjamin's curiosity about her past grew, but he refrained from pressing her. She would share her story if she was ready. "Where did you learn to shoot?" Beatrice asked, changing the subject. "You seem very capable. Army taught me the basics. Rest came from necessity." He poked at the fire with a stick. "What about you? Any experience with firearms?" Beatrice shook her head. "None, though perhaps that's a skill I should acquire given the nature of this territory." "I could teach you," Benjamin offered before fully considering the implications. "Basic handling, at least, might come in handy someday." Surprise and interest lit her face. "I'd like that, thank you." The next morning, after breaking camp, Benjamin spent an hour showing Beatrice how to handle his Colt revolver. She was an attentive student, her delicate hands initially awkward with the weapon but quickly adapting to his instructions. "Keep both eyes open," he advised, standing close behind her as she aimed at a distant tree. "And remember to breathe." Beatrice nodded, her concentration evident in the set of her shoulders. When she fired, the recoil caught her by surprise, but she managed to keep her grip on the weapon. The bullet splintered bark from the tree trunk, several inches from where she'd aimed, but not bad for a first attempt. "Well done," Benjamin said, genuinely impressed. "Natural talent." Beatrice lowered the revolver, her face flushed with excitement. "It's powerful, I didn't expect that." "Power requires respect," he said, taking the gun and demonstrating the proper way to reload. "Never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot." They practiced for another half-hour before continuing their journey. Benjamin noticed a new confidence in Beatrice's posture as they rode, a subtle straightening of her spine. The lessons seemed to have given her more than just a practical skill. As the day wore on, the landscape grew increasingly wooded, the trail winding through stands of ponderosa pine. Benjamin kept a vigilant watch on their surroundings, aware that these forests could conceal both natural predators and human ones. "Is something wrong?" Beatrice asked, noting his tension. "Just being cautious," he replied. "This stretch of trail has seen its share of ambushes." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the crack of a rifle shot echoed through the trees. Benjamin reacted instantly, spurring Duster forward and reaching across to grab Daisy's reins, pulling both horses off the trail and into the dense underbrush. "Stay down," he ordered, helping Beatrice dismount in the shelter of a large boulder. Another shot splintered bark from a nearby tree as Benjamin drew his revolver, scanning the forest intently. "Bandits," Beatrice whispered, her face pale but composed, "most likely." Benjamin's eyes narrowed as he caught a glimpse of movement about 50 yards up the slope. "Two of them, maybe three." "What do we do?" Instead of answering, Benjamin fired 2 quick shots toward the movement he detected. A cry of pain suggested at least one had found its mark. "Hayes." A voice called out. "That you down there?" Benjamin tensed, recognition dawning. Mercer, a rough laugh answered him. "Should have known that was your shooting. Come on out, Hayes. Didn't realize it was you." Benjamin hesitated, his gun still raised. "You shot at us first, Mercer." "Thought you were that supply wagon from Wickenburg. No hard feelings." Benjamin glanced at Beatrice, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. "Stay here," he murmured before raising his voice again. "I'm coming up. Any funny business and I'll put a hole in you." "Fair enough." Benjamin emerged cautiously from their cover, his revolver ready. Two men stood on the slope, one clutching his arm where Benjamin's bullet had grazed him. He recognized them, both Luke Mercer and his younger brother Thomas, small-time outlaws who usually preyed on stage coaches and lone travelers. "What are you boys doing this far north?" Benjamin asked, keeping a safe distance. Luke shrugged, holstering his weapon as a show of good faith. "Heard about a gold shipment coming through. Guess our information was off." His gaze shifted to where Beatrice remained hidden. "Who's your friend?" "None of your concern," Benjamin replied coolly. "Awful protective," Thomas observed, nursing his wounded arm. "Must be quite the lady." Benjamin's finger tightened slightly on the trigger. "You boys best move on, now." Luke raised his hands in mock surrender. "No need for that, Hayes." "We're going," he nudged his brother. "Come on, Tommy, Mr. Hayes here ain't in a sociable mood." As the Mercer brothers retreated into the forest, Benjamin remained alert until the sound of their horses faded into the distance. Only then did he return to Beatrice. Who were they? She asked, emerging from her hiding place. "Local troublemakers," Benjamin replied, helping her back onto Daisy. "Not the worst sort, but not men I'd trust either." Beatrice cast a nervous glance in the direction the men had disappeared. "Will they come back?" "Doubt it. They know I'd be waiting." He mounted Duster, scanning the forest once more. "But we'll take a different route from here, just to be safe." They rode in tense silence for the next hour, Benjamin leading them on a circuitous path through the forest before rejoining the main trail several miles ahead. Gradually, he felt Beatrice relax behind him, though her gaze continued to dart nervously at every sound from the woods. "You handled yourself well back there," he commented as they stopped to water the horses at a small stream. "Most city folk would have panicked." Beatrice dipped her handkerchief in the cool water, pressing it to her flushed face. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but panic wouldn't have helped either of us." "That's a rare quality, keeping your head when fear wants to take over," she smiled faintly. "Perhaps I've had some practice recently." The statement hung between them, an invitation to inquire further. Benjamin hesitated, then decided to take the opening she'd offered. Those men back there, if they were looking for a gold shipment, they had information. Specific information. He watched her face carefully. "Just like Turner's gang always seems to know exactly who to target." Beatrice met his gaze steadily. "You think there's a connection? I think it's worth considering." He crouched beside her at the stream's edge. "Miss Thornton, Beatrice, if you know something about Turner or his operations, that information could be valuable. Not just to me, but to a lot of folks who have suffered at his hands." For a long moment, Beatrice was silent, her fingers trailing in the clear water. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was engaged to be married to a man named Frederick Montgomery, a banker's son from Boston. We traveled west together 6 months ago. He had business interests in Tucson." She paused, drawing a deep breath. It didn't take long to discover that his business interests involved providing information to outlaws about bank shipments, wealthy travelers, anything that might prove profitable. Benjamin listened without interrupting, watching the play of emotions across her face. "When I confronted him, he was different, cold. He explained that his family had lost everything in the panic of '73, and this was his way of rebuilding their fortune." Her voice hardened. "He expected me to accept it, to turn a blind eye. When I refused, he became threatening. Said no one would believe me over him, that I was trapped." "So you ran," Benjamin surmised. Beatrice nodded. "I planned my escape for weeks, waited until we were traveling between Tucson and Phoenix, then slipped away in the night, but Frederick caught up to me near that well where you found me. There was a confrontation, and then Turner's men appeared apparently for a meeting Frederick had arranged. And they shot him," Benjamin concluded. "There was an argument. Frederick accused Turner of shortchanging him on their last arrangement. Turner didn't take kindly to that. Her hands trembled slightly. They shot him right in front of me, would have shot me too if I hadn't run. Benjamin absorbed this information, pieces clicking into place, and now you're afraid to go to Tucson because Frederick had powerful friends there, men involved in his schemes. I don't know who they are, but they'll be looking for me as a witness to both the murder and their illegal operations. The gravity of her situation was clear now. Beatrice wasn't just running from bandits, she was running from men who wore respectability like a mask while orchestrating robbery and murder. This changes things, Benjamin said finally. Fear flickered in Beatrice's eyes. Will you still take me to Prescott? I'll take you to Prescott, he assured her. But after that, we need to think carefully about your next move. These aren't men who give up easily. Relief washed over her features. Thank you for believing me. Benjamin rose, offering her his hand. Let's get moving. We've got a few more hours of daylight, and I'd like to put as much distance between us and this place as possible. As they continued their journey, Benjamin's mind worked through the implications of Beatrice's story. If what she said was true, and his instincts told him, it was then she was in far more danger than he'd initially realized. Turner's gang was dangerous enough, but corrupt businessmen with resources and respectability were often more deadly. By late afternoon, they had reached the outskirts of a small settlement called Pine Creek. It wasn't much a general store, a blacksmith's forge, and a ramshackle building that served as both saloon and hotel, but it would provide shelter for the night. We'll stop here, Benjamin decided, noting the exhaustion evident in Beatrice's posture. Continue to Prescott tomorrow. The proprietor of the hotel, a grizzled veteran who introduced himself only as Miller, eyed them suspiciously as Benjamin requested 2 rooms. Only got 1 room available, he grunted, his roomy gaze lingering on Beatrice. Benjamin could see the discomfort in Beatrice's expression. We'll take it, he said firmly. I'll sleep in the stable with the horses. Miller snorted but accepted Benjamin's payment, handing over a tarnished key. Top of the stairs, end of the hall, washrooms out back. The room was small but clean enough, with a narrow bed and a washstand. Benjamin set down Beatrice's few belongings, the bundle Sarah Jackson had prepared for her, containing a spare dress and basic necessities. I'll check on the horses, then get us some supper, Benjamin said, suddenly awkward in the confined space. Lock the door behind me. Beatrice nodded, her expression grateful. I'll be fine, thank you. Benjamin headed to the saloon portion of the building, ordering 2 plates of stew and cornbread to take back to the room. As he waited, he became aware of a conversation at a nearby table where 3 rough-looking men were huddled over their whiskeys. $500 for information leading to her, one was saying, his voice low but not low enough. Description matches dozens of women, but they're particularly interested in anyone heading north from Tucson. Benjamin kept his expression neutral, though his body tensed. He strained to hear more without drawing attention to himself. What's so special about this woman? Another man asked. Didn't say, but money like that, she either knows something or has something they want bad. The third man grunted. Don't much care what she did. $500 is $500. Benjamin collected the food and left quickly, his mind racing. The description was vague, but the timing and direction couldn't be coincidental. Someone was offering a substantial reward for information about Beatrice, and it wouldn't take long for word to spread through settlements like Pine Creek, where money was scarce and morals often flexible. When he returned to the room, Beatrice had washed and changed into her spare dress. Her hair was damp, framing her face in soft auburn waves. Despite the circumstances, Benjamin found himself momentarily distracted by the simple beauty of her. I brought food, he said, setting the plates on the small table by the window. Beatrice smiled. It smells wonderful, I'm famished. As they ate, Benjamin debated whether to tell her what he'd overheard. Her newfound peace seemed fragile and he was reluctant to shatter it, but keeping her in ignorance could be dangerous. There's something you should know, he said finally, setting down his spoon. I overheard some men in the saloon. There's a reward being offered for information about a woman matching your description heading north from Tucson. The color drained from Beatrice's face. How much? $500. She closed her eyes briefly. That's a significant sum. Enough to tempt most folk in these parts, Benjamin agreed grimly. We need to be careful, perhaps leave before first light, avoid the main trails. Beatrice nodded, her appetite visibly diminished. I'm sorry to have brought this trouble to your door. You didn't bring it, it was already following you. He reached across the table, hesitating before briefly touching her hand. We'll figure this out. The simple contact seemed to steady her. Yes, we will. After they finished eating, Benjamin prepared to leave for the stable. At the door, he turned back to Beatrice. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. She nodded, her blue eyes serious in the lamplight. Benjamin, thank you for everything. He tipped his hat slightly. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. In the stable, Benjamin made a rough bed of straw in an empty stall near their horses. But sleep eluded him, his mind working through their options. Beatrice's revelation had complicated matters significantly. If Turner's operation indeed had connections to respectable businessmen in Tucson, then simply disappearing might not be enough. Men with resources could cast a wide net. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching the stable. Benjamin's hand moved to his revolver as he silently rose from his makeshift bed. The stable door creaked open and a figure slipped inside. Hayes, a voice called softly. You in here? Benjamin recognized the voice of the hotel proprietor, Miller. What do you want? He asked, not emerging from the shadows. Miller startled slightly at his voice. Got some visitors asking after you and the lady. Thought you might want to know. Benjamin's grip tightened on his revolver. What kind of visitors? 3 men, well-dressed, offering money for information. Miller shifted uncomfortably. Told him I hadn't seen nobody matching your descriptions. This surprised Benjamin. Why would you do that? Miller's weathered face twisted into something resembling a smile. Served with the 10th Cavalry, recognize one of our own. Besides, those men had the look of vultures about them. Benjamin relaxed slightly, though his caution remained. I appreciate the warning, they still here. Moved on toward Prescott about an hour ago, but they'll have friends on the lookout. Miller hesitated. Whatever trouble that lady's in, it's serious. These weren't common bounty hunters. No, Benjamin agreed, they weren't. After Miller left, Benjamin knew sleep was out of the question. He needed to get Beatrice out of Pine Creek immediately. Gathering his belongings, he quickly saddled the horses before heading back to the hotel. Beatrice answered his soft knock immediately, fully dressed and alert despite the late hour. What's wrong? She asked, taking in his urgent expression. We need to leave, now. He helped her gather her things. There were men here looking for us. They're gone, but they know we're in the area. Fear flickered across her face, but she remained calm, quickly tying her bundle together. Where will we go? Not to Prescott, not right away. Benjamin led her quietly down the back stairs of the hotel. I know a place where we can lay low for a few days, figure out our next move. They slipped out of Pine Creek under the cover of darkness, Benjamin leading them onto a narrow trail that wound through the dense forest. The moon provided just enough light to navigate by, casting eerie shadows among the trees. This isn't the main trail, Beatrice observed, keeping her voice low. Old hunting path, Benjamin explained. Not many know about it, leads to a cabin about 10 miles west of here. Belongs to a friend who won't ask questions. They rode in tense silence for several hours, the forest alive with night sounds around them. Benjamin remained hypervigilant, aware that a single mistake could prove fatal. Beside him, Beatrice sat straight in her saddle, her determination evident even in the dim light. It was nearly dawn when they reached the cabin, a small, sturdy structure nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Benjamin approached cautiously, checking for any signs of recent occupancy before signaling to Beatrice that it was safe to dismount. It's not much, he said, unlocking the door with a key he retrieved from beneath a stone near the entrance. But it's secure. The interior was simple, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow bed against one wall. A shelf held basic provisions, coffee, beans, flour, and other staples. "Friend of yours must trust you a great deal," Beatrice commented, glancing around the spare accommodations. "Jim Anderson, trapper, goes north during the summer months." Benjamin began preparing a fire in the fireplace. "Saved his life once during a bear attack. He said I could use this place anytime." As the fire caught and spread warmth through the cabin, Benjamin finally allowed himself to relax marginally. "We should be safe here for a day or two. No one knows about this place except Jim and me." Beatrice sank onto one of the chairs, the exhaustion of their midnight flight evident in the slump of her shoulders. What happens after a day or two? It was a fair question, and one Benjamin had been pondering throughout their journey. "That depends on what you want, I suppose." She looked up at him, firelight reflecting in her blue eyes. "What I want seems increasingly irrelevant. What's possible is the more pressing question." Benjamin considered this as he set about making coffee. "You have options, more than you might think." He poured the ground coffee into a pot of water heating over the fire. "You could still go to San Francisco, lose yourself in a big city, or head further north, Oregon, Washington territory, start fresh where no one knows you." "Alone," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Benjamin met her gaze across the small room. "Not necessarily." The implication hung in the air between them, unexpected and yet somehow inevitable. In the short time they'd known each other, something had formed between them, a connection forged in danger and mutual respect. Beatrice broke the silence first. "Benjamin, I couldn't ask you to." "You're not asking," he interrupted gently. "I'm offering to help you get somewhere safe at the very least." She studied his face, searching for something, and at the most. Benjamin wasn't a man given to impulsive declarations or romantic notions. Life had taught him caution, especially when it came to entanglements of the heart. Yet looking at Beatrice now, her courage and dignity intact despite everything she'd endured, he found himself wanting to offer more than just temporary protection. "I don't know yet," he admitted honestly, "but I'd like to find out." A small smile curved Beatrice's lips, the first genuine one he'd seen since finding her by the well. "So would I." The tension in the room shifted, transformed into something warmer, more hopeful. Benjamin poured the coffee into 2 tin cups, handing one to Beatrice. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a brief contact that sent an unexpected current through him. "We should rest," he said, clearing his throat. "I'll take the floor." "Benjamin," Beatrice began, then hesitated. "Thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for believing in me when you had every reason to doubt." He nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some sleep. We'll talk more later." As Beatrice settled onto the bed and Benjamin made a pallet near the fire, a comfortable silence fell between them. Outside, the first light of dawn filtered through the pines, signaling the start of a new day and perhaps a new beginning for them both. Benjamin awoke several hours later to the sound of movement in the cabin. Opening his eyes, he saw Beatrice at the small table, sorting through the provisions he'd brought from their saddlebags. "Hope I didn't wake you," she said, noticing his stirring. "Been up too long already," he replied, sitting up and running a hand through his tousled hair. "Should have posted a watch," Beatrice smiled. "I've been keeping watch. Figured you needed the rest more than I did, considering you're the one who knows how to use that." She nodded toward his revolver, which he'd kept within reach even while sleeping. The casual comment reminded Benjamin of their shooting lesson the previous day. "You're a quick study. A few more lessons and you'll be handling a firearm like you were born to it." "I'm not sure my Boston acquaintances would consider that a compliment," she said with a wry smile. "But out here, I suppose it's a necessary skill." Benjamin rose, folding his blanket neatly. "What's our food situation?" "Better than I expected. We have coffee, beans, some jerky, and the cornbread left from last night." She hesitated. "I took the liberty of starting breakfast." "I hope that's all right." The domestic scene struck Benjamin as oddly comforting Beatrice moving about the small cabin with growing confidence, the smell of coffee and cooking food filling the space. It had been a long time since he'd shared such simple pleasures with anyone. "More than all right," he assured her. After a simple but satisfying breakfast, they discussed their next move. Benjamin spread a worn map on the table, pointing out their current location and the surrounding terrain. Prescott is still our best option, he said. It's large enough that strangers don't draw much attention, and I have contacts there who can help us determine how widespread the search for you might be. Beatrice nodded, studying the map. How long would we need to stay there? A few days, maybe a week. Benjamin traced a route with his finger. From there, we could head west to California if that's still where you want to go, or north if you prefer. And your bounty, the man you were tracking, Benjamin considered this. His original purpose in traveling to Prescott now seemed less important compared to Beatrice's safety. Ellis Harrington isn't going anywhere. Besides, $500 for information about you suggests there might be a larger bounty for your actual capture. That makes you a more valuable target, Beatrice frowned. I don't want to be the reason you abandon your livelihood. One bounty won't make or break me, Benjamin assured her, and some things are more important than money. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. Benjamin was surprised by how quickly Beatrice had come to matter to him, this woman he'd found half dead beside a dry well just days ago. We'll leave tomorrow at first light, he decided. Take the back trails to Prescott. Should get us there by nightfall if we push hard. Beatrice agreed, and they spent the rest of the day preparing for their journey. Benjamin taught her more about handling his revolver, and then, on impulse, presented her with a small derringer he kept as a backup weapon. It's not much, he said as she took the tiny gun with careful hands. Only 2 shots and not accurate beyond a few feet. But it's easily concealed, and sometimes 2 shots is all you need. Beatrice examined the weapon with respect. How do I reload it? Benjamin showed her the process, impressed by her determined focus. There was a resilience to Beatrice Thornton that belied her refined upbringing, a core of steel beneath the polished exterior. As evening approached, they shared a simple supper, their conversation drifting to lighter topics. Benjamin found himself telling stories about his travels, the characters he'd met, the landscapes he'd crossed. Beatrice listened with genuine interest, occasionally sharing anecdotes from her own life in Boston. I always wanted to see the West, she admitted as they sat by the fire after their meal, though I imagined it under somewhat different circumstances. Benjamin chuckled. Most Easterners do. They read those dime novels about heroic cowboys and noble savages, never realizing the real West is mostly hard work, dust, and disappointment. With occasional moments of unexpected beauty, Beatrice added softly, her gaze on the dancing flames. Yes, Benjamin agreed, his eyes not on the fire but on her. Those too. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for traveling. They set out as planned, Benjamin leading them on seldom-used trails that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. The journey was challenging but uneventful, for which Benjamin was grateful. Every hour without incident was an hour closer to the relative safety of Prescott. By late afternoon, they could see the town in the distance, its buildings sprawling across a valley surrounded by pine-covered hills. Benjamin led them down a slope toward the outskirts, where scattered homesteads began to give way to more established structures. We'll avoid the main streets for now, he said as they approached. I know a place on the edge of town where we can stay without drawing attention. The place turned out to be a modest boarding house run by an elderly widow named Mrs. Callahan, who greeted Benjamin with obvious affection. Benjamin Hayes, as I live and breathe, she exclaimed, her weathered face creasing into a smile. It's been too long, young man, Mrs. Callahan, Benjamin replied, tipping his hat respectfully. Hope you have a room or 2 available. The older woman's sharp eyes took in Beatrice, noting her travel-worn appearance but also the quality of her bearing. For you always, and for your... She trailed off questioningly. Friend, Benjamin supplied. Miss Thornton, we've had a long journey. Mrs. Callahan's expression suggested she might have questions, but her hospitality won out. Well, come in, come in. I've got 2 rooms at the back of the house, nice and quiet with a separate entrance if you need it. Once they were settled in their rooms, simple but clean, With real beds and washstands, Benjamin left to stable their horses and make discreet inquiries around town. Before leaving, he gave Beatrice strict instructions to remain in her room and to keep the Derringer close at hand. "I shouldn't be more than a couple of hours," he promised. "Mrs. Callahan will bring you supper. She's trustworthy, but the less she knows about our situation, the better." Beatrice nodded, her expression resolute despite the anxiety he could see in her eyes. "Be careful, Benjamin." He squeezed her hand briefly. "Always am." The town of Prescott was bustling with early evening activity as Benjamin made his way to a saloon called the Silver Dollar, where information flowed as freely as whiskey for those who knew how to listen. He took a seat at the bar, ordering a drink and exchanging casual greetings with the bartender, a man named Doyle whom he'd known for several years. "Haven't seen you around lately, Hayes," Doyle commented as he poured the whiskey. "Heard you were tracking Ellis Harrington." Benjamin shrugged noncommittally. "Got sidetracked on another matter. Speaking of which, you hear anything about a reward being offered for a woman heading north from Tucson?" Doyle's expression turned cautious. "Might have. Why do you ask?" "Professional curiosity," Benjamin replied, sliding a coin across the bar. "Any details would be appreciated." The bartender pocketed the coin smoothly. "Story goes she witnessed something she shouldn't have. Men offering the reward claim she's a thief who stole valuable items before fleeing. But word around the campfire is she knows something that could damage some powerful reputations. These men have names, none that have been spoken openly, but they've got connections in Tucson, Phoenix, even as far as Santa Fe." Doyle leaned closer. "Word is they're desperate to find her before she can speak to the authorities." Benjamin nodded, processing this information. It aligned with Beatrice's story and confirmed his suspicions about the far-reaching nature of the conspiracy she'd stumbled upon. "Any idea how wide they've cast their net?" Doyle shrugged. "Reward posters have been circulating for a week or so. Descriptions are vague enough, but $500 gets people looking hard." He studied Benjamin's face. "You know something about this woman?" "Not particularly," Benjamin replied smoothly. "Just wondering if the bounty's worth pursuing." "I'd be careful with that one, Hayes," Doyle warned. "Whoever's behind this doesn't seem the type to ask questions before shooting." Benjamin finished his drink and headed to the sheriff's office next, hoping to gauge whether the local law had been alerted to look for Beatrice. Sheriff Tom Wilson was an old acquaintance, not quite a friend, but a man Benjamin had worked with before and respected for his straightforward approach to justice. "Hayes," Wilson greeted him from behind a cluttered desk. "Figured you might show up." "Heard Ellis Harrington's been spotted north of town." "Heard that too," Benjamin replied, taking a seat across from the sheriff. "But I'm actually here about something else. You get any bulletins about a female fugitive from Tucson? Auburn hair, blue eyes, mid-20s. Wilson's expression sharpened with interest. "As a matter of fact, yes, came in 2 days ago. Woman wanted for theft and possibly conspiracy to murder." "Why, you seen her?" Benjamin kept his expression neutral. "Just curious, heard there's a substantial reward." "Wanted to know if it was official or private." "Private," Wilson confirmed, though the request came with letters from some reputable businessmen in Tucson vouching for the claim. He reached into a drawer, pulling out a wanted poster that he slid across the desk. "This her?" The sketch on the poster was a reasonable likeness of Beatrice, though it emphasized features that made her appear harder, less trustworthy. The text described her as Beatrice Thornton, wanted for theft of valuable documents and complicity in murder. "Approach with caution as subject is considered dangerous and desperate." "Can't say," Benjamin replied, pushing the poster back. "Just heard talk and thought there might be money in it." Wilson studied him for a moment. "You know, it's funny. Got a telegram this morning asking specifically if you'd been seen in town and whether you were traveling with a woman matching this description." Benjamin's blood ran cold, though he maintained his casual demeanor. "Is that right? I'm flattered someone's keeping tabs on me." "I haven't sent a reply yet," Wilson said meaningfully. "Figured I'd wait until I had something definite to report." The implication was clear. The sheriff was giving Benjamin time to explain himself or clear out. Their history gave him that much leeway, at least. "Appreciate that, Tom," Benjamin said, rising from his chair. "I'll let you know if I come across this woman." As he turned to leave, Wilson's voice stopped him. "Hayes, whatever you're mixed up in, be careful. I've been a lawman long enough to know when something doesn't smell right, and this." He tapped the wanted poster. "Doesn't smell right at all." Benjamin nodded his acknowledgement before stepping back into the gathering dusk. His inquiries had confirmed what he'd feared. Beatrice's pursuers had resources, influence, and a long reach. Simply hiding wouldn't be enough. They needed a more permanent solution. When he returned to the boarding house, he found Beatrice waiting anxiously in her room, a half-eaten meal on the table beside her. "What did you learn?" she asked immediately. Benjamin closed the door behind him before speaking. "They're looking for you, all right, and they know we're traveling together." He explained what he'd discovered, watching her face pale as he described the wanted poster and the telegram to the sheriff. "So they know I'm here," she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the fear in her eyes. "They suspect, but don't know for certain. Sheriff Wilson is giving us some time, but he can't ignore a legitimate-seeming request forever." Benjamin paced the small room. "We need to leave Prescott, but first we need a plan. Somewhere to go where these men can't follow." Beatrice was silent for a moment, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What if we stopped running?" she suggested finally. Benjamin turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "These men Frederick's associates, they're afraid I'll expose their operation. What if we do exactly that?" Her eyes were alight with a newfound determination. "If their crimes become public knowledge, they lose their power over me." It was a bold strategy, but not without merit. "You have evidence?" "Something concrete," Beatrice hesitated. "Not physical evidence, no, but I know names, dates, details of their arrangements with Turner's gang. I was present for many of Frederick's meetings. He didn't bother hiding things from me once I discovered the truth. In fact, he seemed almost proud of his cleverness." Benjamin considered this. "Testimony alone might not be enough, especially against men with influence, but if we could corroborate your account somehow—" "Turner," Beatrice said suddenly. "If he were captured, he might be willing to implicate his business partners in exchange for leniency." The idea was dangerous but had potential. Turner's gang was notoriously elusive, but they operated within a specific territory. With the right bait, they might be drawn out. "It's risky," Benjamin warned. "Very risky." "More risky than spending the rest of my life running," Beatrice countered. "These men won't stop Benjamin, not until they find me or are convinced I'm no longer a threat." He couldn't argue with her logic. "Let me think on it. We'll leave Prescott tomorrow, head west. I know some places where we can lay low while we formulate a plan." That night, as Benjamin lay in his narrow bed in the adjacent room, he found himself torn between conflicting impulses. The cautious bounty hunter in him recognized the danger in confronting Turner's gang and their powerful backers. But another part of him, a part he'd thought long dormant, wanted to help Beatrice find justice, to stand beside her as she reclaimed her life. It wasn't just about the growing feelings he harbored for her, though those were undeniable. It was about right and wrong, about not allowing corrupt men to wield power unchecked. Benjamin had spent years tracking criminals for money, but this felt different. It felt like purpose. Morning came with a decision. They would leave Prescott as planned, but instead of simply running, they would set a trap for Turner. It was a gamble, but one Benjamin believed might pay off if they were careful, strategic, and perhaps a little lucky. "We need to send a message," he explained to Beatrice over breakfast in her room. "Something that will draw Turner out without alerting the businessmen behind him." "How do we do that?" Benjamin smiled grimly. "By offering something Turner can't resist." "Information about a gold shipment, a real one this time." Beatrice looked skeptical. "And how do we obtain such information?" "I have a friend who works for the Wells Fargo office in Wickenburg. He can help us arrange it." Benjamin leaned forward, his expression serious. "But understand what we're doing, Beatrice. We're deliberately putting ourselves in danger." "I understand," she replied without hesitation, "but I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid." They left Prescott shortly after dawn, traveling southwest toward Wickenburg. Benjamin had left payment and a brief note of thanks for Mrs. Callahan, who he suspected would face questions about their stay once it became known they had been in town. The journey to Wickenburg took 2 days of hard riding. They avoided main roads and settlements, camping in secluded locations and maintaining vigilant watches. Though tiring, the journey strengthened the bond between them. They shared stories, dreams, and gradually, more personal confidences. Benjamin found himself speaking of things he rarely discussed: his experiences during the war, his hopes before life had hardened him, his occasional longing for a more settled existence. Beatrice, too, opened up further about her life in Boston, her decision to accept Frederick's proposal despite reservations, and her determination to create a different future for herself. "I always did what was expected," she admitted one night as they sat beside a small campfire. "The proper schools, the proper friends, the proper engagement. Frederick seemed the perfect match, charming, well-connected, from a good family. My parents were delighted, and you?" Benjamin asked, watching her face in the flickering light. A sad smile touched her lips. "I thought I could be content, that affection would grow into love over time." She poked at the fire with a stick. "Even when we came west and I began to see aspects of his character I hadn't noticed before, I told myself it was just the stress of travel, of new surroundings." "When did you know you had to leave?" Beatrice was quiet for a moment. "There was a family traveling on the same stage coach as us from Santa Fe to Tucson, a young couple with 2 small children. They weren't wealthy, but the man mentioned they were carrying their life savings to start a new life in California." Her voice hardened. "That night, I overheard Frederick providing details about them to one of Turner's men. The next day, we heard the stagecoach they'd transferred to had been robbed. The father was shot trying to protect his family's money." Benjamin nodded, understanding dawning. "And you knew Frederick was responsible?" "I confronted him. He laughed, actually laughed." Her eyes, reflecting the firelight, held a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Said it was just business, that people should be more careful about sharing their personal details with strangers. That's when I knew I was engaged to a monster." Benjamin reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "You're not responsible for his actions." "No," she agreed, "but I'm responsible for my own, which is why I can't keep running. These men need to be stopped before more innocent people suffer." In that moment, Benjamin knew with certainty that his feelings for Beatrice had deepened beyond mere attraction or protective instinct. Her courage, her moral clarity, her determination to do what was right despite the personal cost, these qualities resonated with values he'd thought long buried beneath years of cynicism and survival. When they reached Wickenburg, Benjamin left Beatrice at a small inn on the outskirts of town while he sought out his contact at the Wells Fargo office. Martin Weber had been a fellow Union soldier during the war, and the bond formed in battle had endured despite infrequent contact over the subsequent years. "Ben Hayes," Martin greeted him warmly when Benjamin entered the small office. "What brings you to this dusty corner of the territory?" Benjamin closed the door behind him, ensuring their privacy. "Need your help, Marty. It's important and confidential." Martin's expression grew serious as Benjamin outlined their situation and plan, omitting certain details about Beatrice but emphasizing the criminal nature of Turner's operation and its corrupt backers. "Let me get this straight," Martin said when Benjamin finished. "You want to set up a fake gold shipment to lure Turner's gang into a trap in hopes of capturing Turner and getting him to testify against his business partners." "That's about the size of it," Benjamin confirmed. Martin whistled low. "That's either the bravest or the most foolhardy plan I've ever heard. And you're doing this for a woman you met, a week ago?" "It's not just about her," Benjamin replied, though he couldn't deny Beatrice's centrality to his motivation. "These men have been operating with impunity for too long. How many innocent people have been robbed, injured, or killed because of information they provided to Turner?" Martin studied him for a long moment. "You've changed, Ben. There was a time when you wouldn't have stuck your neck out like this for anyone." "Maybe I'm tired of just surviving," Benjamin said quietly, Maybe it's time to start living for something more, his friend nodded slowly. All right, I'll help you. But we do this smart, with every advantage we can muster. Together, they crafted a plan. Martin would arrange for word to spread about a special gold shipment traveling from Wickenburg to Prescott in 3 days' time, a shipment significant enough to tempt Turner, but not so outlandish as to arouse suspicion. The route would take the shipment through a narrow canyon where Benjamin, with help from a few trusted men Martin would recruit, could set up an ambush for Turner's gang. If this works, Martin said as they finalized the details, you'll have Turner, but what then? His testimony alone might not be enough to bring down his partners. One step at a time, Benjamin replied. First we catch the fox, then we worry about the henhouse. When Benjamin returned to the inn, he found Beatrice waiting anxiously in their room. He outlined the plan to her, watching her expression shift from hope to determination. Martin thinks Turner will take the bait, she asked. Gold is a powerful lure, especially in the quantities we're suggesting. Benjamin sat beside her on the small settee. But Beatrice, when this happens, you need to be somewhere safe, far from the action. She shook her head firmly. No, I need to be there. Turner needs to see me to know that I'm the one who helped set the trap. It's too dangerous, Benjamin protested. This is my fight too, Benjamin. Her blue eyes held his steadily. Perhaps more mine than yours. I won't hide while others risk themselves on my behalf. He recognized the determination in her expression, the same determination that had kept her alive in the desert, that had given her the courage to flee an impossible situation. Arguing would be futile. You'll stay back from the main confrontation, he compromised, and you'll be armed. Beatrice nodded, accepting these conditions. Thank you for understanding. The next 3 days were a flurry of preparations. Martin recruited 4 men he trusted, former soldiers who now worked as guards for various businesses in Wickenburg. Benjamin scouted the canyon thoroughly, identifying the best positions for their ambush. Beatrice practiced with the derringer until she could hit a target reliably at close range. Word of the gold shipment was strategically leaked through channels known to be connected to Turner's information network. The bait was set. Now they could only wait and hope the trap would be sprung. The morning of the planned shipment dawned clear and cool. Benjamin and Beatrice rode out before first light, accompanied by Martin and his men. The wagon that would serve as their decoy carried several locked strongboxes, empty save for a few gold coins to create convincing weight and sound. Turner's men will likely scout the route before making their move, Benjamin explained as they positioned themselves at the canyon. We need to appear legitimate but vulnerable, a tempting target but not an obvious trap. Martin and 2 of his men would drive the wagon, appearing as typical Wells Fargo guards. Benjamin and the other 2 men would conceal themselves among the rocks overlooking the narrowest part of the canyon, ready to close the trap once Turner's gang made their move. Beatrice, despite her protests, was positioned in a sheltered alcove with strict instructions to remain hidden unless absolutely necessary. As the sun climbed higher, tension mounted. The wagon proceeded slowly through the canyon, Martin and his companions maintaining the appearance of alert but unsuspecting guards. Benjamin, hidden among the rocks with his rifle ready, scanned the surrounding terrain constantly for signs of Turner's approach. The attack, when it came, was swift and coordinated. 6 riders emerged from a side ravine, bandanas covering their faces, guns drawn. Benjamin recognized Turner immediately, a tall man with a distinctive black hat, riding slightly ahead of the others. That's far enough. Turner called to the wagon. Toss your weapons and step down, nice and easy. Martin and his men complied, making a show of reluctance as they disarmed. Turner sent 2 of his men to secure the guards while he and the others approached the wagon. Right on time, Turner commented, examining one of the strong boxes. Almost like you knew we were coming. It was the moment Benjamin had been waiting for. He signaled to his hidden companions, and 3 rifles fired simultaneously from the rocks above. 2 of Turner's men fell immediately. A third was wounded, clutching his arm as he sought cover behind the wagon. Benjamin's shot had deliberately missed Turner, striking the ground at his feet instead. "Throw down your weapons, Turner," he called, revealing his position. "You're surrounded." Chaos erupted as Turner and his remaining men returned fire, bullets ricocheting off the rocky canyon walls. Martin and his companions seized the opportunity to reclaim their weapons, creating a crossfire that left Turner's gang with no clear escape route. Within minutes, it was over. 2 of Turner's men were dead, 1 severely wounded, and 2 others had surrendered. Turner himself remained defiant, pinned behind the wagon with his revolver still in hand. "It's finished, Turner," Benjamin called. "Drop your gun and come out." "Like hell I will," Turner shouted back. "I'm not hanging for this or any other job." What happened next occurred so quickly that Benjamin would later struggle to recall the precise sequence of events. Turner made a desperate break from his cover, firing wildly as he ran toward a narrow path that led up the canyon wall. Benjamin and the others returned fire, forcing Turner to dive behind a boulder. Then, to Benjamin's horror, he saw Beatrice emerge from her hiding place, moving toward a position that would give her a clear view of Turner. Whether driven by a desire to confront the man who had killed Frederick or simply seeking a better vantage point, her movement caught Turner's eye. "You," Turner exclaimed, recognition evident even at a distance. "Montgomery's woman." Before Benjamin could shout a warning, Turner raised his gun and fired at Beatrice. Benjamin's heart stopped as he saw her stagger, but to his relief, she remained standing, returning fire with the Derringer. Her shot went wide, but it distracted Turner long enough for Benjamin to take careful aim. His bullet found its mark, striking Turner in the shoulder and sending him sprawling to the ground. In moments, Benjamin had descended from his position and reached Turner, kicking away his weapon before the outlaw could recover. "It's over," Benjamin said, pressing his revolver against Turner's chest. "You're finished." Turner glared up at him, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You set me up. How'd you know about the shipment?" "Same way you did," Benjamin replied coldly, "through information. Difference is, mine was deliberately placed for you to find." As Martin and the others secured the surviving members of Turner's gang, Benjamin hurried to Beatrice. To his immense relief, Turner's bullet had only grazed her arm, tearing her sleeve but causing only a minor wound. "I told you to stay hidden," he admonished, though his voice was gentle as he examined her injury. "I needed to see him captured," she replied, wincing slightly as he bound her arm with a clean bandana. "Needed to know it was real." Benjamin understood. After everything Beatrice had endured, witnessing Turner's capture represented a crucial step toward reclaiming her life. "What happens now?" she asked as they watched Martin and his men load the prisoners into the wagon. "Now we take Turner to Wickenburg. Let the law handle him formally." Benjamin's arm slipped around her waist, supporting her as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade. "And then we present our evidence against his partners." The journey back to Wickenburg was tense but uneventful. Turner, despite his wound, maintained a sullen silence, refusing to acknowledge Beatrice or respond to Benjamin's questions about his business associates. The other captured gang members were similarly tight-lipped, their loyalty or fear apparently outweighing any desire to cooperate. In Wickenburg, Sheriff Davis received their prisoners with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Been trying to catch Turner for nearly 2 years," he commented as his deputies escorted the outlaws to the jail. "Never thought I'd see the day." "There's more to this than just Turner's gang," Benjamin explained, detailing the connection to the businessmen in Tucson. "These men have been providing information about potential targets in exchange for a share of the profits." Sheriff Davis's expression grew serious. "That's a significant accusation, Hayes, especially without concrete evidence." "I have evidence," Beatrice interjected. "I witnessed meetings between Turner and Frederick Montgomery, who was acting as an intermediary for several prominent men in Tucson. I know dates, locations, specific shipments they targeted." The sheriff regarded her thoughtfully. "And you're willing to testify to this, publicly?" "I am," Beatrice affirmed without hesitation. Davis nodded slowly. "I'll telegraph the territorial marshal." This extends beyond my jurisdiction, but he'll want to hear about it. He glanced at Turner, who was being led away in shackles. Meanwhile, I'll see if our friend here might be persuaded to corroborate your account in exchange for consideration regarding his sentence. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of official statements, telegrams, and meetings with various authorities. The territorial marshal arrived from Prescott, bringing with him a federal judge who had been investigating corruption in the Arizona Territory for months. Beatrice's testimony proved invaluable, providing connections and details that aligned with existing suspicions. Turner, facing the prospect of hanging for multiple murders committed during robberies, eventually agreed to cooperate in exchange for imprisonment rather than execution. His testimony, combined with Beatrice's, created a compelling case against three prominent businessmen in Tucson, including a bank president and a member of the territorial legislature. Arrest warrants were issued, and within a week, the men were in custody. The scandal rocked the territory, with newspapers from Santa Fe to San Francisco carrying stories about the corruption and criminal conspiracy that had been operating in plain sight. For Beatrice, the resolution brought a profound sense of relief. The threat that had hung over her for months was lifted, replaced by public vindication. Her courage in coming forward was praised by the authorities and chronicled admiringly in news accounts of the affair. "What will you do now?" Benjamin asked her one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house where they'd taken rooms in Wickenburg. Still planning to go to San Francisco, Beatrice gazed at the sunset painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "For so long, all my energy was focused on surviving, on escaping. Now that it's over, I find myself without a clear direction." Benjamin nodded, understanding her uncertainty. His own future seemed similarly unmoored. The reward for Turner's capture had been substantial, supplemented by an additional bounty for the other gang members. For the first time in years, he had the financial means to consider options beyond his hand-to-mouth existence as a bounty hunter. "We could go to California together," he suggested, the words emerging before he'd fully formed the thought. "Or north to Oregon. I've heard the Willamette Valley is beautiful, good land, plentiful water." Beatrice turned to him, surprise and something warmer lighting her blue eyes. "We." Benjamin met her gaze steadily, acknowledging the depth of feeling that had grown between them over their shared ordeal. "Yes, if that's something you might want." "Benjamin Hayes," she said softly, "are you asking me to accompany you on another journey?" "I'm asking for more than that," he replied, taking her hand in his. "I'm asking if you might consider building a life with me, not just traveling together but staying together, making a home somewhere." Emotion welled in Beatrice's eyes. "I think I've been falling in love with you since you found me beside that well and said you'll drink before I do." Benjamin smiled, remembering that first encounter, how fragile she had seemed then and how strong she had proven to be. "I think I started falling for you the moment you didn't panic when those bandits shot at us, knew for certain when you insisted on facing Turner yourself." He leaned forward, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "I love you, Beatrice Thornton. Didn't expect to, didn't plan to, but there it is." "And I love you, Benjamin Hayes," she whispered before his lips met hers in a tender kiss that held both promise and passion. When they parted, Beatrice's eyes were bright with happiness and unshed tears. "So, Oregon or California?" "Wherever you want," Benjamin replied, his heart fuller than he could ever remember it being. "As long as we're together." 3 weeks later, they stood on the deck of a steamer bound for Portland, Oregon. Behind them, the coast of California receded into the distance. Before them lay a future neither could have imagined when fate brought them together beside a dry well in the Arizona desert. Benjamin's arm encircled Beatrice's waist as they watched the setting sun transform the Pacific into a shimmering expanse of gold and crimson. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Beatrice leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his shoulder. "Not one," she assured him, "though I do wonder sometimes what might have happened if you hadn't found me that day." "I've wondered that too," Benjamin admitted. "But then I remember something my father used to say. Some things are just meant to be. Beatrice smiled, turning in his arms to face him, like a thirsty cowboy finding a half-dead woman beside a dry well. Like a man finding the other half of his soul when he least expected it, Benjamin corrected, drawing her closer for a kiss that tasted of salt spray and new beginnings. 6 months later, they stood hand in hand on a ridge overlooking their newly acquired homestead in the Willamette Valley. Below them stretched fertile acres bordered by a clear, rushing stream and sheltered by towering evergreens. The foundations of their house were taking shape, with local craftsmen hired to help Benjamin construct a home sturdy enough to withstand the Oregon winters and spacious enough to accommodate the family they both hoped to create. "It's perfect," Beatrice declared, her eyes drinking in the pastoral beauty of their land. Benjamin squeezed her hand, still amazed by the turn his life had taken. From solitary bounty hunter to homesteader, husband, and soon-to-be father. Beatrice's gently rounded belly beneath her dress was evidence of the new life that would join them by winter's end. "Perfect," he agreed, though his gaze was on her face rather than the landscape. "Worth every step of the journey that brought us here." As they descended the ridge toward their future home, Benjamin reflected on the strange workings of fate. A chance encounter in the desert, a simple act of kindness, "You'll drink before I do," had set in motion a series of events that transformed both their lives immeasurably. That evening, as they sat before the campfire that still served as their kitchen until the house was completed, Beatrice read aloud from a letter that had arrived with the weekly mail delivery from Portland. "Sheriff Davis writes that all 3 businessmen were convicted," she reported. 20 years each in the territorial prison, and Turner received life imprisonment rather than hanging thanks to his cooperation. Benjamin nodded with satisfaction. "Justice served, then?" "Yes," Beatrice agreed, folding the letter carefully. "Though I think of them less and less as time passes. They no longer have power over my thoughts or fears." "Good," Benjamin said, moving to sit beside her on the log that served as their bench. "There are far better things to occupy your thoughts now." She smiled, taking his hand and placing it over her belly, where their child grew stronger each day. "Indeed there are. A future to build, a family to raise, a life to live fully and without shadows." As the stars emerged in the clear Oregon sky, Benjamin Hayes held his wife close, marveling at how a moment of compassion beside a dry well had led to this abundance of love, of purpose, of hope. The West had taught him harsh lessons about survival, but Beatrice had reminded him of what it meant to truly live. "I was thinking," she said after a comfortable silence, "if it's a boy, perhaps we might name him after your father." "James," Benjamin supplied, warmth spreading through him at the suggestion. "James Hayes, it has a good sound to it." "And if it's a girl," she prompted. Benjamin considered for a moment. "How about Hope? Seems fitting, given everything." Beatrice turned her face up to his, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Hope, yes, that's perfect." She stretched up to kiss him softly. "Just like this life we're building together." As their lips met beneath the vast, starry sky, Benjamin silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led him to that dry well on that scorching day. In offering Beatrice the last of his water, he had unknowingly opened the door to a lifetime of abundance that neither of them could have imagined possible. In the years that followed, their homestead prospered, growing from a single cabin to a thriving farm with orchards, fields of wheat, and pastures where horses grazed. Their family grew too. Hope arrived that first winter, followed 2 years later by James, and eventually by a third child, Elizabeth. Benjamin and Beatrice Hayes became respected members of their community, known for their generosity, integrity, and the deep bond they shared. On summer evenings, they would often sit on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the golden light as the sun set behind the distant mountains. And sometimes, when the children asked for a bedtime story, they would tell a tale of the wild Arizona desert, of courage and second chances, of a cowboy who found a woman beside a dry well and said the words that would change both their lives forever. "You'll drink before I do."